is Chris Baker with Keller Williams Advantage 3 Realty over in Lake Nona, and I am excited that we have Chris Gordon, another Chris. You know, I like to work with Chris's. Okay, so like Chris Gordon with Advantage Insurance Solutions is here, and we're going to talk a little bit today about insurance. And there's always, you know, what's interesting about it is that I always get questions about insurance, and I'm not the expert, and that's why I have partnered with amazing professionals like Chris to make sure that I'm always on top of all the information that's out there and how it's affecting the consumer and how we can do better and how you can do better about saving money and just positioning yourself and knowing not to get in a bad situation. Because obviously in Florida, a lot of times things happen. We have a lot of natural disasters and have things that occur. And so it's important that you know things to be worried about, things to be prepared about, and so you can make the most informed decision moving forward. And so, Chris, we're excited to have you today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
I appreciate it.
So, Chris, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and, you know, why you got into this crazy insurance business stuff?
Yeah, I've been in the business since 1993, so I've been around about 25 years. Advantage Insurance Solutions is a full lines independent agency, and what that means is we can go out there and shop the market for all the carriers out there and not just throw one product your way and try to make you fit in that box. We kind of custom create the quotes around your needs, the property, etc. And we're able to do homeowners and auto and health and life insurance. So we are kind of a one-stop shop.
Cool, awesome. And so what do you feel like is a lot of times, what are you seeing when, you know, if someone's like going to work with a direct insurance person, not saying anything's wrong with that, but they might have some limitations. And so there's opportunity there. If what flexibility do you have being a insurance? Would be an insurance broker, or how what would be the
independent agent? But a broker would be a comparable explanation. So by having access to multiple carriers out there and not just one, if we have a challenge in regards to a particular property, age of the home or a component of the home, roofing, electrical, that's an issue, we're not dead in the water right there. We can shift gears and look at different options, different carriers, and find the best solution for that home.
Cool, awesome. And so what do you feel like, when homeowners are kind of looking for, consumers are looking for to save money on their insurance policy, what are some of the, just the really quick things that they can do in order to save money on insurance policy?
Okay, a few things. If you have a monitored fire and or burglar alarm, make sure your agent is aware of that. They'll need a certificate. That's a credit on your policy there. There's something called a wind mitigation program that came out in the state of Florida back in March of 2002. And there were some changes to codes in regards to new construction and re-roofs. So if you have a home that was built before March of 2002 that has had a new roof put on since then, you have this wind mitigation inspection done. They're usually about $100. You give that to your agent and they can plug in the wind mitigation credits. You want to make sure that you're updating your agent on any home improvements you're making so that your policy is reflective of that. And shop it every few years. It's not a buy it and leave it alone forever and ever. On average, we see 3 to 4 years. Every 3 to 4 years, you shop it, and we're usually able to switch a client to another carrier and save money. Could be $100 a year. It could be $500 a year.
Oh wow! Well, that's important to know.
So, yes,
because a lot of people, I would assume, just once they have it, they just keep it going and all that kind of stuff, and that works automatically and all that kind of thing.
It's typically through a mortgage, so it comes out of your escrow account. You don't really pay attention to the renewal forms that come every year. You're not privy to what the actual outlay is because your mortgage company is paying that for you.
Yeah. And so do you see anything that sometimes that would maybe cause it to go up, like insurance policy? Like, is there something that if the homeowner does this, you could, expect it to go up?
Claims activity clearly is a trigger. You're not automatically going to get canceled, but depending on the type of claim, if it's an act of God, we call it claim, a hurricane, something of that nature, that's not going to be held against you. But in our industry right now, water claims are a big deal.
Okay.
Old plumbing systems, old hot water heaters, and it's a big thing. So if you start to have those type of claims, theft claims, liability claims, multiple claims, then you could potentially have a problem with getting canceled or non-renewed.
But but typically, you like if you don't do anything, would your policy stay the same, or does it you could expect rate increases?
You're typically expecting a rate increase because the carriers can't focus on you specifically, but they do file rate increases with the State Department of Financial Services, and those get passed along to the consumer. So as those rate increases get filed, carriers sometimes will file rate decreases. But typically you're going to see a 5, 10, 15% rate increase on an annual basis, and that's why you need to shop it every few years.
Right. And is it hard to get insurance in Florida?
It's not hard. There are some things to look out for. Clearly, like you mentioned earlier, we got hurricanes, we've got sinkholes, we've got a lot of flood zones. So because of that, the carriers are a little bit more strict than they would be or that we see in other parts of the country. So really, it's the older homes that have been a challenge the last few years, but in and of itself, being at least in the Central Florida area, it's really not a concern. On the coastal communities, obviously, you've got some carriers that don't like that those areas that are subject to the water.
Cool.
The tidal influx.
So one of the things that I notice that always comes up for some of the older homes, can you tell us a little bit about the 4-point inspection?
Absolutely.
Because and a lot of times people don't know this until after they decide, hey, I'm trying to get my insurance. They've already done maybe their home inspection, and then they realize, based on the age of the home, that they need a 4-point inspection. What is that? What is a 4-point inspection?
A 4-point inspection, Chris, is basically an abbreviated version of the primary home inspection, and it is looking for the age, condition, and life expectancy of the plumbing system, the roof, the electrical, and the heating and AC system.
Okay.
Most carriers will require a 4-point inspection on homes over 30 years old.
30 years old. Okay.
That's typically your trigger.
Okay, cool. And then, what's nice about that is that usually that 4-point inspection is probably around $100, I think, it's additional rider to it. And usually, as long as you tell your inspector, they can actually just do that for you, and then they give you that additional piece, and it's a real big benefit because it could save you a lot of money, or it's a requirement.
Typically it's a requirement because we need that information off that 4-point to determine what carrier or carriers are a good fit for that home.
Yeah, and so look, for example, let's say that something comes out with your plumbing.
Yes.
Like polybutylene plumbing is like a one of those things that could possibly come up in that.
Correct. So
right?
A lot of people ask, my home has polybutylene, what's that going to do to me? What it's going to do is it's going to eliminate a good majority of the homeowners insurance carriers out there. They just don't accept it. There are carriers that are okay with it, but typically it comes along with water damage exclusions or restrictions, which are not an ideal thing to have on your homeowners insurance.
And what does that look like? If someone, let's say someone has polybutylene plumbing, right? And let's say we get in these situations where maybe the seller doesn't want to pay for it, and they love the home, they're just in love with the home. What impact does that have on their insurance policy typically?
It doesn't really have an impact. A lot of people say, what's it going to do to my rates if I have polybutylene or if I have another item of concern? It doesn't really do anything to the rates, but it does limit your options. And therefore that could keep a much more competitive option off the table because you have polybutylene. So
it could cost them money in their rate if they don't have that polybutylene plumbing.
If they do have it, then it's going to limit their options that they have. They could have looked at 20 carriers before. Now they can only look at 2 or 3.
Got it. All right. And then the other piece that always comes in there is that Florida Pacific panel.
Federal Pacific.
Federal. I always say Florida Pacific. I don't know. Federal Pacific.
Chris, that's an electrical panel make that's unacceptable to most carriers. There are some out there that are fine with it. There are some other brands, Sylvania, Challenger, Zinsco. So there are a handful, but Federal Pacific is the one that we do encounter the most.
Okay, got it.
And again, there are some that take it, but most do not.
Yeah. And do you know any of the challenges with those, or is it just like is it something that the reason why they don't?
My understanding of it, Chris, is the breakers can sometimes not trigger when they're supposed to, causing a short circuit and a fire. Yeah.
So obviously they don't want your house to catch on fire, so they don't want to insure you.
And you don't either.
Right. You definitely don't want that kind of moving forward and stuff like that. So, and so obviously some of those things kind of come up. You said we talked about roof. We talked about the wind mitigation, how that is a combat for that.
Sure.
We talked about the Florida Pacific and some of those electrical panels. We talked about polybutyl piping. Anything with the AC that usually comes up that we, typically most people wouldn't even think about.
Correct. That's a good point, Chris. And a lot of times what happens with the AC ages, the carriers will shut us off at around 15 to 20 years old.
Oh, okay.
And it is confusing because a lot of people go, it's in good shape. The inspector says it works great. It could even look great, but it is a potential water hazard. If the drip pan overflows inside the house, you're out of town, and you come home and it's flooded your house. Your AC system technically could do that.
Oh, wow.
I've also been told by underwriters as they get older, there is a concern or an additional concern there of a fire hazard.
Got it. Okay.
On an older unit.
So usually you're going to need to do something. If it's 15, you said 15 years?
15 to 20, depending on the carrier.
Got it.
The 4-point inspection you mentioned earlier, what the carriers will like to see on that report that says that the component in question is good, average, or better condition. If they start to see things like fair or poor condition, that's where they don't want to have anything to do with it.
Okay, yeah. So when you're doing your home inspection, these are some of the things that you either want to negotiate up front or have some vehicle or no. One of the things I think is probably most important is when you're going through the process, that you don't want to have that kind of show up at the last minute, right? You don't want to have any surprises that are going to hinder you to purchase the home. And knowing these things up front, you can work with your agent in order to maybe get some compensation for some of that stuff if you need to be, right? And so one of the things that I think comes up too is that, and I always wondered why people wanted your credit score for insurance policy. It has an impact, correct?
Depending on the carrier, your date of birth and your social could have an impact. What a lot of carriers call it your financial responsibility credit. There's a lot that they're looking at there. It's not directly tied to your credit score all the time, but there are more and more carriers that are looking at that component of things. Sometimes it could drive a quoted premium up, but typically we see it come down. Okay. And it is a soft hit. It's not a hard hit on your credit. So as you're going through your mortgage process, it's not a concern.
Okay.
From that.
Oh, that's good to know too. So, and two, if you're out there and you have some questions or you want us to answer anything, feel free to ask. While we have Chris here, he can answer any questions, and he's going to be providing this information. So after, if you've read this, you've seen this at a later date, and you still have some questions, Chris is going to be available for you for any questions that you might have about your insurance policy, because he might be a good option for you to maybe check into your insurance policy as well, and maybe get a competitive rate. One of the things that obviously we're in Florida, and so now we're in hurricane season.
Yes.
Okay, and so can you talk through, when you're buying a home during hurricane season, some of the things that you probably need to know up front in order to do that, as well as how things to know about having hurricane coverage?
Absolutely. So all your admitted HO3 policies in the state of Florida include wind coverage unless specifically excluded. So hopefully you're working with an agent that is not excluding wind.
You can actually exclude wind?
Exclude wind.
I didn't even think you could do it.
I don't know why anybody would, but yes, you can.
Yeah. Crazy people, that's why.
So getting to your point, when you're looking for homeowners insurance in hurricane season, as these storms develop out in the ocean and they get closer, the carriers will start to lock out our binding authority, our ability to bind a policy, even quote a policy, make endorsement changes. So you need to be up to speed on your knowledge about what your hurricane deductible is. You have an all other perils deductible, which is a per occurrence deductible. Then you have a hurricane deductible, which is per year or per storm season. That is typically industry standard is 2% of whatever the dwelling amount of your home is. Okay. A lot of people weren't aware of that the last few years through the hurricanes.
So say that again. Could you say that again?
Yeah.
Because I think that's a kind of important point.
Absolutely. So your hurricane deductible is a separate deductible, and it's typically tied to the percentage of what the home is insured for.
Okay.
So if you have a $200,000 house or dwelling, you've got a 2% hurricane deductible, you're going to have a $4,000 deductible for that hurricane season.
Right. So if you have a couple of missed shingles and you want to get a claim for that, does it make sense to file a claim for a couple?
That's a great question. While we as the agent will never recommend that you don't file a claim, What we do recommend is maybe you have somebody analyze the extent and the cost to repair that damage before you go filing that claim. And once people don't understand, even though an insurance company may not pay out on that claim, it is still a claim on your record.
Wow.
The more claims you have, the potential issues you have down the road. So what my recommendation is maybe have a contractor come out, have a friend come out, do an analysis of maybe you only have $500 of damage. You don't have 2% of your dwelling amount. So that's a very good point. Don't be so quick to just make that your first phone call. Maybe do a little analysis.
Yeah, because one of the things I think happens too, and I'm going to ask you this question. I have a thought process behind it, but if someone, does it make it harder for someone if they're a notorious claimer?
It does. It does. Most carriers will look back anywhere from 3 to 5 years, and they've got a number of claims restriction, and that's they can do that because it's a policy they have in place. They're not looking out as an issue for that particular person. It just says if you have these types of claims, these number of claims, and then they narrow it down and say you're not acceptable as a client until those claims expire or go away.
Oh wow!
And then we look at another carrier.
So you could be banned from insurance.
It can make it difficult.
Or they give you a higher premium. Is that what it happens?
That could impact ultimately as well. There's a lot of formulas that go into that.
Okay.
One more thing I want to hit on in the hurricane component. A lot of people don't understand that if you have a screen enclosure, if you want your screen enclosure covered in the event it's damaged due to a named storm, there is a separate endorsement that you have to add to your homeowner's insurance policy to ensure that this screen enclosure is covered in the event of a named storm. So maybe you've put a pool in since you've moved in. That's why you want to update your these things with your agent, and they can advise you of endorsements to add or coverages to increase. Okay,
that's good to know. Because probably a lot of people don't think about that kind of stuff when they just add a pool, they add a screen, and they're not thinking about, is this coverage if I haven't updated this information?
Yeah, you need
insurance policy.
To update your dwelling amount. You need to add the screen enclosure endorsement. You need to do these things. So that's why a phone call to your agent once a year and tell them what's going on. New dog you just got. You upgraded the kitchen. Multiple things like that.
Got it. Now, I just had a question for you because it kind of drew something. Drew a thought that I had about. So you want to make sure you're just updating the information and all that good stuff, just so you have it. Now, when you're looking at the policies or anything else with hurricane coverage that people might not know that they need to know, that would be helpful.
If you are in the process of buying a home and you are in hurricane season, you want to go ahead and get that policy shopped and get it bound before the agent's binding authority goes away. We can do all of that with no payment. No payment. We get the policy bound, it's in play, and then if the named storm comes in and the carriers lock us out, your policy's good to go, no issues. We can't make any changes after it's bound, but you can go ahead and get it bound so that you don't have a last minute, you forgot to take care of that, the mortgage broker needs you to do it. All of a sudden, the quote that you wanted to get, you can't get because we've got an impending hurricane.
And usually, what's that window of time that they have between named storms, like before and after the storm? I guess I don't know if there's an after or whatever.
When we start to become part of the eye, if you will, they just start. There's no rhyme or reason, but usually when one carrier starts, the rest of them will come. As far as when the binding authority is restored, depends on how impacted we were. It could be a day, it could be a week or two, depending on the severity of where it hits.
Yeah, and then they could, and we had that problem before where some carriers back in 2005 just left the state because the impact was so devastating for those hurricanes.
That was a big year for our industry because you're right, a lot of the big names left, but what it did do, Chris, it created an environment for a lot of startup carriers to form, and a lot of these carriers are now 10 plus years old. They're very well established. Most of them were started by veterans in the business, so it's not a situation where you just had a couple guys decide, hey, let's get into the insurance industry. That year was a transitional year for the amount of options we have.
Cool, awesome, that's good to know. And so the other thing that I hear is flood insurance, right? And so this one I think comes up with, because maybe there's certain coverages that would have to do with hurricane, and maybe certain things that maybe due towards flooding. But people might think I'm covered, but you're not. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Correct. So a normal homeowner's insurance policy, Chris, is going to cover for things like your plumbing system malfunctioning, the tornado blowing the roof off, things of that nature. But what a homeowner's insurance policy does not include is damage caused by natural rising water, I call it, from the ground up. Okay. That is covered through a separate flood policy. Until very recently, it had to be purchased through the National Flood Insurance Program, which is obviously government driven. There has been a trend in our industry the last year or two, the private flood market. So now you have the homeowners insurance carriers now offering private flood. Typically, if you are in a preferred zone X here in our area, your lender is not going to require it, and it's strictly a voluntary move on your end if you just decide to have flood insurance as a safeguard.
Right.
If you are in a non-preferred flood zone, then your lender is going to require it. And then to get an accurate flood quote on a home in a flood zone, we have to have an elevation survey, which creates an elevation certificate. There's a lot of data on that certificate that we plug in the system and we're quoting. So we have a lot of people, they call and go, can you give me a rough estimate on a flood quote? We laugh in the office, we say it could be $200, it could be $2,000. We don't know until we have that elevation certificate.
Got it. Okay.
But it's usually going to be lender driven. They're going to be the ones that determine, or that red flag, if you are in a flood zone or not.
Got it. And so there could be a situation where if you have rising water and you're not in a flood zone, you might not be protected. That's true.
That's correct.
Yeah,
that's
and
correct.
It doesn't matter if it was a hurricane that brought all this. Your hurricane coverage is not going to cover possibly that. Is that true? Is that?
That's correct. So I saw a story on the news the other night, and Central Florida is a booming economy, and all the construction areas that. Where's all the water going these days? So I saw a story on the news. There's an area out in the west part of town. They never had flood issues before. They're in a preferred zone X, and this particular area, they're flooding because of a lot of the road construction, new home construction, new neighborhoods being built. So It is something we got to monitor.
Oh wow, wow. So the other thing that maybe the other piece of it is, okay. So I get this question a lot. Is like, hey, I'm scared to move to Florida because there's a bunch of sinkholes everywhere.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that and some things to know about being in a flood, like a sinkhole location. And I, from my experience, and this more because you're dealing with it day in and day out. There's a lot of areas where I say it's not as prevalent, and then there's some areas that it's very prevalent.
Yeah.
Maybe where are some of those areas that you kind of need to be worried about or be concerned about in general about sinkholes and stuff?
Sinkholes is a very, very confusing component of our state and our industry. But as far as areas of the state that are more prone, Tampa is more prone. Ocala, Gainesville area, we're not on a high spot here in the Central Florida area.
Good to know. See, hey, another reason to move to Central Florida versus other parts of the state is that we don't have to worry as many about sinkholes.
With that being said, is most admitted carriers in the state cover for what's known as catastrophic ground collapse. That is the definition that you would see on the news where the earth opens up and swallows half the building, leaves it condemned, so on and so forth. That is covered. You're covered for that. The definition of sinkhole coverage that is no longer automatically included, and we transitioned out of it back in 2009, 2010, was a definition of sinkhole where it's more cosmetic in nature. The stair stepper cracks in the drywall or the stucco, cracks in your walkways, cracks in your driveway. More of the cosmetic issues. We had a bad fraudulent sinkhole claim problem back in the day where the carriers were paying out a lot of money on cosmetic related issues, and you can't get that anymore automatically. There are some old grandfathered policies in play that you may still have that definition of sinkhole coverage, but they've transitioned into 10% sinkhole deductibles.
Wow.
If you file a claim on that definition of sinkhole, it does follow you and it does follow the home. The key thing to know is the major stuff, the stuff that ends up on the news is catastrophic ground collapse. You're covered for that.
Yeah. So good thing to know too. I mean, I'm glad you said that about the other pieces. Sometimes, and I think you've said this in a variety of different ways, is that be very careful what you claim, right?
Yes, sir.
Because it could have an impact on your rates. It could have an impact on you now. It could have an impact on you selling your house if you ever want to move. Because when someone else wants to take over that home and they had a reference to something that's significant, like a sinkhole
activity,
it could cause you a lot of challenges and stuff like that. So, just something to kind of know with that. Cool.
No, great point. Great point.
And so, are there any other trends or anything like that you're seeing in the insurance that maybe the consumer would need to know that maybe we haven't covered so far?
Yeah, we had an issue developed a few years ago on something that's called an assignment of benefits form. And what this is where, depending on damage you may have to the home, a roof, or water pipe burst, you would have contractors coming out getting you to sign this assignment of benefits form, telling you they'll handle everything with the insurance company. A lot of times they were even offering to pay for the deductible. But what you're doing when you sign that assignment of benefits form as the homeowner and the insured, you are signing away your rights to that claim. You're basically given everything, all the privilege to communicate with the insurance company to that contractor. So there have been some bad abuses in regards to assignment of benefit forms. The state passed some legislature a couple months ago that I think is a good step in the right direction as far as how those quotes, the contractor, if they do quote it, it's got to be an itemized bid. It can't just be a blanket bid for a new roof or a job. It's got to be itemized. It's got to be submitted within a certain time frame. So I think that's going to help weed out a lot of the guys that are taking advantage of that. So that's a trend we've seen, some abuses there. Hopefully that's going to get curtailed. We were talking earlier, roof ages. We're seeing some of the carriers get tighter and tighter on that. A lot of the carriers will allow roof ages up to 15 years old or up to 20. We're starting to see a couple of carriers that have ratcheted that back to maximum 10 years. And it's to kind of do away with those older roofs that are more susceptible to damage in a hailstorm, in a hurricane, things of this nature. So it's kind of a nasty cycle we're seeing, that one thing is just, it's causing another problem, that is causing another problem. So
cool.
That's something we're seeing. And at the end of the day, like we talked earlier with claims, they result in policy renewals and rate increases that get extended to all of us. It's not our industry is not what happens here impacts us here. There's reinsurance market. We have a tragedy in Texas that in some degree affects us here and vice versa. So a lot of people don't realize that.
Cool.
But yeah, that's about what we're seeing, the trend of tightening up on the assignment of benefit forms, be educated on buying older homes, talk to your agent, communicate with them, don't hide things. We get a lot of clients that will say, well, I've got a friend that has polybutylene, how did they get it? Well, that could be an old grandfathered policy. Maybe an agent didn't ask the right questions when that policy was sold. Maybe information was withheld. There's always a reason for that.
Yeah, and one of the things I think it's important that you say that is because in insurance, being honest is more important for coverage.
Correct.
Than not for some people, like, for example, what I'm saying is that people will make decisions based on the rate, and I want to keep my rate down, right? But at the end of the day, you want the coverage.
That's correct.
Because if you lie about something that's in the coverage, and then when you go to claim it, they're going to be like, well, we didn't know about that. You're not covered for that particular thing because we're not aware of it. You don't want to be in that position. At least I don't want to be in that position.
That's correct, Chris. That's a good point. What we do out of our agency, we do all of our due diligence up front when we quote the policy. We're not asking these questions when the client says, okay, I would like to go with this route. We ask that up front so we know. We ask, what kind of dogs do you have? What are the breeds? Do you have the claims history? We ask, how old's the home? Do you have a 4-point? So we're up front telling you in advance what options you have, and they're valid out of the gate. There's none of that concern after the fact.
Yeah, cool, awesome. Well, gang, I hope you learned something today. I did. And this is why it's important to have like trusted partners and resources, and we're really particular about who we put and we put in front of you, because we want to make sure that, one, you're just represented and you're getting honest and fair and informative information so you can make the most financial and best decisions for you and your family. And so, Chris, and we're glad to have you. And so if someone wants to reach out, maybe find out a little bit more, how do they reach you?
Phone number is 407-695-6094. You can ask for myself, Chris Gordon. I am the agency owner. Email address is my first initial C, last name Gordon, Gordon, at cgordonins.com.
And then you have a great website that if people want to, do you have a website?
Yes, it's www.adv, the first three letters of the word advantage, insurancesolutions.com.
And we'll make sure we post this so you have it, so you don't have to like keep on watching the video and see me and him talking and really trying to do it. We'll put it out on the video so you have that information so you can get that. And so we got any questions out there? Anybody want to ask anything of Chris before we kind of cut out? If not, we'll see you next month. We're going to have another one of our preferred lenders or preferred resource folks that we kind of do business with. And Chris, thank you for coming out.
Thank you, Chris. Glad to be here.
Sharing your knowledge and support with our community.
Hopefully it helps. Thank you.
Awesome.